The combine is an important piece of the prospect puzzle, and a lot of players are trending up and down after a very eventful week in Indianapolis. Jeff, let's talk through some of this week's biggest risers and fallers. And I think the first guy we got to talk about is a guy that we talked about last week when we said players to watch at the NFL Combine. And you talked about Tyler Show, quarterback out of Louisville, and said that you thought he was going to surprise a lot of people with his athleticism. Well, he may have surprised a lot of people, but I don't think he surprised you, Jeff. He put up some good numbers there. Talk to us a little bit about Tyler Show. I mean, is he a guy? Is this real? Like, is he moving up to QB3 now? Or are we looking at him as a potential first rounder? Or is this just, a good weekend and we'll just kind of mark it and move on?
Well, first off, Dave, the way you handled saying that important piece of the prospect puzzle, just rolling through and punching all the P's, good job. I do appreciate
Thank you.
that. So,
alliteration, yes.
Yes. So Tyler Stowe, we talked, we did a combine, profile or preview, whatever you wanted to call it. And we did say that he would be a player to watch out for. He was one of the few players that did do all the testing. It's because he shows out well. He's a big athletic guy. He tested very well on the athletic terms. This is an older prospect, and it's kind of one of those, it's very, NFL teams have gotten better about it. But when we were growing up, or like you remember, there was always like that 6'5" guy that you weren't quite entirely sure he could actually play, but he just looked like a quarterback. And so like Blaine Gabbert type of a player,
there
was always that guy. And I think that
Mhm.
Tyler Show, there's a little bit of that guy in this class.
Well, if Tyler Show had a good, impressive athletic week, he was actually in the shadow of Brady Cook, who had an even better week. Looking at it again, we're talking pure athleticism here. His relative athletic score, according to our friend Kent Lee Platt, 9.68, puts him as the 33rd most athletic quarterback dating back to 1987. That is out of a sample of 989 quarterbacks. So Brady Cook, really athletic, but I guess he's going to rise a little bit because of that. But I think I still have some concerns about his arm talent and accuracy. What do you think, Jeff?
Cook is fascinating to me. Even when I did his profile for the rookie guide, like it was, the athleticism showed up. We see it and expected the testing that he was going to do. It's one of these things that, one, everybody that has watched Luther Burden hates Brady Cook.
Yes.
And so
Exactly what I was going to say.
part of it. But two, like when you're looking for a player out of this class to fit the Brock Purdy mold, and you look at Brady Cook, and he's won the last 2 years. He won 21 games at Missouri in the SEC. Mm-hmm. They won 11 games one year, 10 games the next year, and that's at Missouri in the SEC, winning a bunch of games there. I think he's got just about every Missouri passing record, or he's up there. And you see the athleticism come through, and that testing shines out. So all of a sudden, you've got a guy that he's played a lot of snaps. He's won a lot of football in a high-level conference. He's a sneaky, deceptive athlete that can maybe scramble a little bit and make some things happen. And I'm not entirely sure he can throw the football at all.
So, should make for a really fun NFL prospect. Let's go ahead, though. Move on from the quarterbacks. Talking about more risers here. So much ado was made before the combine about how good this running back class was. And, Jeff, it's living up to the hype. I mean, these are some darn good running backs. And you look at the athletic testing, you look at the size adjusted speed score. I mean, we've heard that upwards of 30 running backs might get drafted this year. And, looking at the way that these guys performed at the combine, of course, there was no Ashton Ginty, but it didn't matter. I mean, even without the best running back in this class working out, we still got some great performances. Amari Hampton was a guy that we knew was a workout warrior. He checked every single box we wanted to see. But I think Quinshon Judkins is an even bigger winner. I think he was that guy that everyone kind of had at the bottom of the tier with Travion Henderson and Amari Hampton and Caleb Johnson. But Quinshon Judkins came out and answered every question that his doubters had. The speed was there. The explosiveness was there. The agility was there. He looked fantastic in his drills. And I talked about it last week that he was a tough evaluation because of the way that he and Travion Henderson were utilized at Ohio State. But man, Quinshon Judkins really, really elevated himself in this class after the combine. What are your thoughts on Judkins? A guy I know you have been a fan of for a while.
Yeah, and you talked our preview episode. I said he's got the quickness to get the corner. He's being discounted in that area, and he came through. The athletic testing is there, and a lot of the takes and opinions about his speed came out of that one play in the national championship game. Kind of quieted a lot of those things, and I think it's one thing to say, well, he got ran down on that play. It's another thing to realize he did break off like a 75-yard run in a national championship game. So, I mean, that's not nothing. So that works there too. A real quick note on Amari Hampton. I think through this process in fantasy, we've like general hive mind has seen Genty like way in front. I think within the actual NFL circles, it's more than one and it's more than two teams have a Marion Hampton as their running back one in this class over Genty. So I think that that's very real. And it could maybe come down to scheme fit when you kind of fall and where these running backs are going to end up actually going in the draft. I mean, it would be
Yeah.
a surprise probably to a lot of people to see Hampton before Genty. I don't know that we should be shocked if that does play out that way.
Yeah, I did an article on Sunday morning talking about this running back class, combine risers and fallers, where I kind of went in depth on a lot of these running backs. But I did link that. It was Tony Pauline was the one that reported that, saying that many NFL teams have Omarion Hampton ahead of Ashton Ginty. And Ginty obviously has the college production, but man, you look at Hampton, the way he moves at that size, whew, like you said, this is a deep class with a lot of really good running backs. Some other risers, though, still talking about the running backs because there are so many. Cam Scatabo, didn't run the 40, which I think a lot of people really wanted to see, but he did test very well in the vertical and in the broad jump, giving himself an elite explosive rating, according to Relative Athletic Score. RJ Harvey was another guy who just burned the track, looked really good in his agility drills as well. DJ Giddens, another guy who I made the joke in the article that I wrote, the readers are probably getting sick of me saying all of these historic relative athletic scores, but that's what we got this week was a lot of historic ones. And DJ Giddens was there as well. So Cam Scatabo, RJ Harvey, DJ Giddens, anything to add on those guys, Jeff?
Hello, Cam Scataboo. I am willing to admit defeat here. I did watch a YouTube video that said Scataboo. It's Scataboo. I do think
I
it
said
is
Scatabo a few times, hoping you would correct me. Yes,
I
Scattaboo.
do think
Scattaboo. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm there. I'm there. So listeners, readers, commenters, you have finally won. When we saw the athleticism, the jumping and all those types of things there was great. Giddens is a guy that I think we always kind of knew he was going to be an athlete.
Yeah.
Questions about is he actually does he know how to play running back? I think is kind of where like that type of question lands. RJ Harvey was a player that he's a smaller school player. Well, UCF isn't really smaller school anymore. I mean, they are in the Big 12, but they do kind of get that label. But
I forget
to
if
see him
was
come
it this
through with the
show or was it
athleticism,
another show that I talked about RJ Harvey as the guy to watch at the combine. I can't remember. I did a lot of shows last
I'm
week,
not
but RJ
sure, but I
Harvey was the guy I
know
was excited about.
you and Alfredo kind of corrected. I think of the guy we did call him slow, and that was wrong. I think that he's a faster guy, but Tuten, I mean, is the big winner out of all of this. You see him come through and just kind of blow everything out of the water. Obviously, the fastest 40 time of any of these running backs. We saw him. He made plays downfield as a receiver at Virginia Tech. He can do a lot of different things, and so that is the eyebrow raiser, I think, of this entire group, of this entire combine out of the running back position.
They say the fastest 40 time. He also had the fastest 10-yard split. He had the fastest or the highest vertical, and he was fourth among all running backs in the broad jump. So it wasn't just the 40 time. I mean, this guy was excelling at every single drill. You could see how fast his footwork was during the drills that they were doing on the field as well. So I think this is an interesting question because we talk about moving players up and down inside tiers. I got to be honest, Jeff, Tuten was like off my draft board, RB30, something like that. But I've moved him up quite a bit because we saw this last year. A guy like Isaac Arendo that I wasn't too familiar with pre-combine goes out there, lights the combine up, and then gets an ideal landing spot. And when the opportunity comes around in the NFL, he looks good in that role. Might not be the most technical, refined running back, but that athleticism shows out on an NFL field. Tuten is a little bit smaller, but got to kind of apply the same principles there. I mean, I moved him all the way up to RB15. Do you know where you have him off the top of your head, Jeff?
Not right now, no. I need to update my running back ranks, so I'm not quite there yet. But you do see that performance, and I saw people were comparing his testing numbers to Devin Achan's testing numbers, and
Yeah.
basically saying Tuten's like 30 pounds heavier than Achan. So that's not nothing. That it's just one of those that type of performance. You go out with that athletic performance, somebody is going to make the bet on him. If it's day 2 or day 3. He is now in that round 3, round 4 running back conversation that raises your eyebrows because, again, one team out there, we say, I know Seattle has always been one of those teams that has leaned heavily on the athletic testing. I know Cleveland likes the young players that test very, very well athletically. there are teams that they will just blindly make that bet on one of these players working out, and you perform like that, you're going to be in that tier. And we talked before, a lot of what we're trying to do is predict draft capital, trying to predict, get guys in the correct bucket or correct valuation. And Tuten should be in that round 3, round 4 kind of sweet spot for running backs now.
And you talk about Seattle. I mean, I think it's so obvious to a lot of people, but I think San Francisco, Miami, those guys that really like those one cut runners that can just burn the field on a wide zone scheme.
Yeah.
I think that's what Tootin can do really well. So don't be surprised to see him land in one of those Shanahan systems. And if that happens, it's rinse and repeat from last year with Isaac Orendo, a very athletic guy falling on a team with a very strong run game. If that opportunity comes up there, Bhayshul Tuten is definitely a guy to keep an eye on in rookie drafts. Jeff, would it be a show talking about running backs if I didn't squeeze in Taj Brooks here? I just want to say he checked the elite box for his agility. So age is going to push him down a little bit on draft day, but a player that I really, really like and was happy to see him perform well in the drills that I wanted to see him perform well in. Let's move on to the wide receivers because we have a lot of risers here as well. Jack Besh, another guy that we talked about last week, is somebody to watch at the combine. I think there were some concerns about his athleticism. He put those concerns to rest, and he looked great this week. Torrey Horton, another guy that I talked about to watch at the NFL Combine, had himself a really good week with some good athletic testing, ran a really good 40 time. But Jeff, one of the guys that you've talked about a lot and really turned me on to earlier in this this rookie season that we're doing right here, Isaac Tesla had an awesome day. So talk to me a little bit about him and how you think that athleticism could potentially transfer to an NFL field.
Again, this is one of those of flash the Wayback Machine. Remember Matt Jones from the Jaguars, also from Arkansas? He was he just came up, blew up the combine at wide receiver, and I think he did go in the first round, I do believe, and obviously it didn't really work out great, but I don't think Tesla is in the first round conversation by any means, but it's one of those that you have that type of performance, somebody's going to make a bet on you. And my expectation, I think he's probably the dreaded day 3, but like that round 4, round 5 type wide receiver that somebody will make a bet on that of working out just because there's so much there in the athletic package.
So I have family in Gainesville. Well, my wife has family in Gainesville, Florida, and we go down there and see them often. And last year during the NFL season, right before kickoff, actually, I was in Gainesville and I was gushing about Ricky Pearsall to all of my wife's family that are UF fans and just going on and on about how much I like Pearsall. And what they said is, if you like Pearsall, just get, be sure to check out this guy, Chamir Dyke, as well. And didn't have an extremely productive 2024 season, but looked great at the combine this week. And that's a guy that you wanted to talk about a little bit, Jeff. Again, we see the athleticism translates well for wide receivers. He's a guy who I think a lot of people probably had as a fringe day 3, maybe undrafted guy, but you just can't ignore what he did there. Do you think he's going any higher than day 3, or do you think he's just still going to be one of those toolsy day 3 guys with athleticism that you want to spend a 4th or 5th round rookie pick on?
I think he's a day 3 pick, and I got some brushback because I had him at, I think maybe like wide receiver 25-ish when my initial ranks, and some people were like, what are you talking about? This guy's not even on the radar. And he goes out and he blows out athletic testing, and he's the type of player that he has contributed multiple different areas. He's a return game player, he's a special teams player, and one of the biggest things, especially with wide receivers, is a path to kind of talk about the ladder of like you can contribute on special teams, you can be a returner, okay, that gets you on a roster, you're the type of player that you can stretch a field, that gets you on the field because you can stretch the field, and then you kind of step in and you can able to earn a role. And he has been a primary receiver for, they haven't been the best passing offenses, but in college at Wisconsin and then at Florida, he's been the leading target on those types of teams because he can do a lot of different things. And we see now he is that high level athlete. He is able to contribute in the return game. And so you're starting to stack on pieces towards a player becoming a fantasy sleeper and a dark horse that can become that type of player. And this type of profile is exactly that.
Now, I also want to give you the floor to talk about another guy that you have talked about quite a lot over the last couple of months. Arian Smith had a great 40-yard dash, which you had anticipated. Do you still kind of see him as a day 3 guy, or do you think he has maybe climbed those ranks as well?
Yeah, I think he's a day 3 guy. I thought there was a chance that he would run in the 4.2s. He didn't quite get there. He was 4.36 guy. So I thought he was going to be kind of that guy to be able to flirt with the low 4.2s. And I think if he had done that, then we were really starting to talk about the the day 2 conversation.
Hey,
I do think
4.36 is nothing to scoff at.
it's not, no. But I do think that kind of puts him more like the, maybe a 6th roundish type of player.
Now, the last wide receiver I want to talk about as a riser is apparently the second coming of Calvin Johnson. If you didn't know this, Jeff, Dante Thornton, 6'5", and ran a 4.3 flat. You look at the list of NFL players who have done that speed at that size, and it is a very short list of almost nothing but NFL Hall of Famers. So, is that it? Dante Foreman, or I'm sorry, not Dante Foreman, Dante Thornton. Is some team going to take a chance on this guy in day 2 just because of the size speed combo, or do you think that he still kind of stays a day 3 guy?
Day 2 would shock me. I just don't think
Yeah.
he's there in day 2. And this is another player when I wrote
It
him
only
up. When
takes
I
one
watched
team,
it
though.
before,
Only takes
it only
one
takes
team.
it only takes one team. But when I wrote him up, it was crazy because you're watching all these wide receivers and you're looking at numbers, and it was like 700 some receiving yards, and you see 700 some receiving yards. That doesn't exactly ping in your mind, but then you see 26 catches and doing that on 26 catches, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that
That's
probably should be
something.
like 50 catches to get to that number. And so but like his tape was interesting because it was, you'd get him, he's obviously a huge player and very fast, and they basically just had him run wide receiver screen type of plays or vertical plays, and he had 6 different times or so where he just would break a tackle from a corner that was on one-on-one coverage and then run 70 yards for a touchdown. And that's like his 6 touchdowns.
I mean, who's going to catch him? He's running a 4.3. Who's going to catch him?
But it was wild because I went through each of his games, and when I saw these numbers, because of 6 touchdowns, and almost, I think every single one of them were 50 to 70-yard touchdowns.
So Jalen Coker-esque tape is what you're saying here.
No, Jalen Coker was making plays downfield. This dude is not making plays downfield. This dude is just catching the ball and breaking one tackle and running in a straight line.
Well, we're happy to see him really show out this week. We'll see if NFL teams take a notice on draft day. We do have tight ends, though, that are risers as well. And there were a lot of tight end risers this week. We got Mason Taylor, Terrence Ferguson, Luke Lachey, and Joshua Simon are the 4 that we're going to kind of highlight here. But I don't want to talk about them too much because we have a show coming out on Wednesday where we're going to go in depth talking about all these tight ends, tiers, rankings, the consensus between Jeff and I, where we agree, where we disagree. But Jeff, out of these 4 guys, real quickly, Mason Taylor, Terrence Ferguson, Luke Lachey, Joshua Simon, is there one that you'd like to talk about for a minute?
Just singing the praises of Joshua Simon again, every
Yeah.
opportunity. Again, you blew it out, and that's what we were hoping to see. Player that I was very high on through the process, because you did see that show up: the athleticism, the receiving ability downfield, the ability to create in different areas in this receiving game shows up in his tape, and you see the testing shows up. The size is there. This isn't one of these guys that are 225 pounds. Like, what are you going to do with him? I mean, he's legit tight end size. So that was fun to see him come through in the way that he did.
Yeah, and I'll just mention Mason Taylor real quickly because I've talked about Terrence Ferguson and Luke Lachey enough over the last couple of months. He was a guy that I had a little bit lower in my tight end rankings. And when I say lower, I mean like tight end 4 or 5, but I have moved him up to tight end 3. He looked amazing. You just look at, or I'm sorry, tight end 4, I moved him up to. He just looked amazing. Such a fluid player, just catching balls with ease. And look at that gauntlet drill. We talked about that last week as well. One of the drills that I am most locked in on during this weekend, and he looked amazing in there. I don't think his foot came off the white line once. Now, we've talked about risers, and we've talked about quite a few of them, but yeah.
Bullying your friends works. So there.
You did.
Bully
You
your
bullied me
friends.
into that one. Thank you. So we talked about the fun part, the risers, the guys who are doing better, today than they were this time last week. Now we have the unfortunate part where we have to talk about some of the fallers, some of the guys who didn't perform as well. And it's not even always any fault of their own. Sometimes these guys in tiers can go out and have an average day, but if all their peers, the guys that are ranked around them, are having show out days, it does inevitably make them fall down a little bit. Now, I think Caleb Johnson is the perfect guy to talk about here as a faller. Caleb Johnson looked good. I mean, he still had a size adjusted speed score over 100, weighed in at 221 pounds, but when you compare what he did to what Omarion Hampton did and Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, he is unfortunately one of the guys that probably falls down. So we talked about this. We want to use the combine to kind of move guys inside of tiers. And I think a lot of people had Caleb Johnson in that tier 2. And if you had him at the top of tier 2, maybe the combine is enough for him to fall to the bottom of that tier. What are your thoughts on Caleb Johnson, Jeff?
Well, on one of our last shows, I'm not gutsy enough to like throw out I'll do something crazy if this happens, but I was about there with this talk on Caleb Johnson running a 4.3.
Four three
I,
one is what we said that they had marked him down for at Iowa, and
I
you
think
said
if
there's no
you
way.
I think if you look at that show, I said to my eyes he was a 4.55 guy, and where did he end up coming in?
4.57.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Which I got to say, yeah, at 221 pounds, 4.57 is
yes,
not
you're
bad.
moving.
Yeah, but it was the fourth slowest time among this entire running back group, which just
Yeah.
speaks to the depth of this class and how good it is that you can go out and run a 4.57 and still be one of the slowest in the class. Now, of course, when you adjust for speed, he's kind of middle of the pack, but there were concerns about his breakaway speed and his inability to kind of log a better 40 time might leave those questions unanswered. So I don't want to sit here and dog on Caleb Johnson by any means. He's a very good running back, probably still going to go to day 2, but I think a lot of people now are comfortable moving Omarion Hampton, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins ahead of him. Caleb Johnson probably falls to about the consensus RB5 after this weekend. Is that about what you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's where he is for me. Trent Richardson ran a 4.45, by the way. So,
A 4.45 or a
yeah,
4.55?
no, 4.45.
Yeah, so he was moving.
No,
All right.
it's no. I think that Johnson is just a player that it it was just getting out of control. Probably on a lot of it. Steven Jackson, I think, was like maybe like the high end had he come in like in that
Mhm.
low 4.4s type of a thing, and um, it. I don't know. I think he's a very very good player. It's just that a lot of what I would see on tape, a lot of his runs were kind of more like 4-yard runs that turned into 60-yard runs because
Yeah.
they tried to tackle him around his chest, and he was much larger than the guys that were trying to tackle him around his chest.
Well, the other thing, we talk so much about the 40 times because the 40 times are exciting and records get broken and it's good for viewership.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it is the least important drill that all of these running backs do. Tej Seth from Sumer Sports, he recently did a study talking about which drills correlate best to career production. 40 time was dead last there. The two that you really want to pay the closest attention to are the shuttle and the 3-cone. And it makes sense because 95% of an NFL player's touches in the NFL are going to be acceleration, deceleration, lateral movement. You've said this before, Jeff, so I'm just going to completely steal this from you. But how many running backs are even afforded the opportunity to run 40 yards in a straight line in the NFL? It doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah, and you see, it really is the elite of the elite. The H hands and the Saquon Barkley and the Gibbs. That when you get them in the open field, they can actually create those 65-yard touchdowns.
But
Almost
guess what? They're
everybody
not
else
getting in the
gets
open
run down.
field if they don't have the acceleration, the deceleration, the lateral quickness. That's what gets
Right.
them in those opportunities. So you need the full package. If you are just a pure straight line runner without that lateral quickness, doesn't really matter that much. So some of the guys that didn't test so well in those important metrics, Jordan James, Woody Marks, Kyle Monangai, those are some guys that were kind of late round sleepers that some people were holding on to hope for. I was a big Woody Marks fan personally, and I think he still has the out as a pass catcher at the next level. But at the end of the day, those were guys that we were hoping for better athleticism for, and we just didn't see the athleticism this week. So for guys like this, Jeff, that are kind of already at the fringe day 3 undrafted type of guys, when they come out and have a bad combine, how much weight do you put in that?
To me, so like Kyle Monangai, to me was a red flag that he didn't get invited to either the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl
Yeah.
because his profile was high enough coming out of the production and doing everything at Rutgers that he did do. That if they're not invited to one of those bowls, especially as a 5th-year player, that's going to be kind of off my radar immediately. And so to see his testing back that up a little bit, it kind of tells you I don't see Kyle Monangai getting drafted. And so running backs are kind of dead to me if they're not going to get drafted. I mean,
Yeah.
it can work out in camp. I think Jordan James is still. I mean, I was wrong. I thought he would perform a little bit better on that preview show that we did do, but I do think that he's still kind of going to be in that 4th to 5th round range where you're hoping he lands in the right position. Woody Marks too.
He's got the pass
kind of
catching out, which I think is
the
kind of
pass
nice with
catching
getting yards.
element,
Yeah,
yes, works out very, very well for him. And that kind of overcomes maybe some of the athletic testing. It's not it's not one of these things. I don't know that. I mean, outside of Monangai, their performances were bad enough to just really be
write him off.
disqualifiers
Right.
on that end. And again, Woody Marks, you're betting on the skill in the pass game. Jordan James, you're betting on Oregon high end production, the being a blue chip player and kind of having that type of a younger player, an early declare in a class where you see a lot of fourth or fifth round guys. That's kind of the bet still on James. So that's kind of there. It's just that they didn't shoot up the board like Bhayshul Tuten did. It's
Right. And that's the thing, for some guys to rise, there do have to be fallers. And, it's not that we're saying that these guys are now undraftable or anything like that. Just move them down a little bit so you can make room for the Tutons and the guys who really, really came out and look good. Now, on to the wide receivers. This might be a shock to the audience, but Jeff Bell and I, we talk a lot of football off air. We are texting and chatting on the phone a lot. And Ricky White was a guy early on that I started to like. And Jeff, you politely said, "Well, look at what Ricky White's doing. Can you see him doing that in the NFL?" And then I kind of had to reframe how I saw it. And I said, yeah, I think you're right. I think the routes that he is running probably won't translate to the NFL. And what looked really athletic on a college field when he's beaten off ball linebackers across the middle of the field didn't look quite as athletic when he was compared to his peers, the other wide receivers in this draft class. So I think Ricky White is a little bit of a faller. Tez Johnson, though, man, he's got to be one of the most confusing guys that I saw from the combine, because his 40 time was not good, but then he went out there and lit up the 3-cone drill. So showing the quick twitch mentality, you almost wonder if it was just bad form, like he wasn't coached up how to properly run a 40. We've got to put him as a faller because of the relative athletic score here, and how small he weighed in at, but there's still some hope for Tez Johnson.
so Ricky White, there was a random Twitter commenter when I released my first initial wide receiver ranks that told me that I could put my head somewhere after I had Ricky White behind Chamari DK. And so we see how that worked out. So
Oh,
there
it's
you got that going.
DK. Okay, well, I'm sure I'll get shredded for how I pronounced that one earlier in the
Well,
show.
no, I'm sure I'm confidently wrong on that one. No, I think that's what it is, though. But Tez Johnson, yeah, I mean, it's a player that we knew the size was what it was going to be coming in. I mean, the tape is there on Tez Johnson for the most part. He did a lot of work underneath, probably at Oregon, and so that's where you're kind of like it. I've seen comps to Tank Dell, and Tank Dell
Yeah,
was just cooking dudes downfield, and Tez Johnson's was not doing the same thing that Tank Dell was doing, and so that's kind of where I get off on the similar size, similar ish speed profiles. Johnson, you were really hoping that he would be a player that would lay down something in the 4.4s at the very minimum. Again, this isn't kind of, I don't know that you view it as qualifiers, more dequalifiers, but Tez Johnson, you don't love seeing that size speed package, probably because now an NFL team's got to talk themselves into what's he going to be for us. And
right.
ultimately, I thought he was going to be like a 3rd round pick for the Broncos. I think he's going to be now like a 6th or 7th round pick for the Broncos, but you reconnect with Bo Nix and kind of get some good vibes going with his brother there. But I don't know about that.
And pretty much everything you said about Tez Johnson, we could also say about Jimmy Horn, a guy that I was kind of excited about, an undersized guy who I thought was really going to light up the athletic testing, and it just didn't happen. There came in a little bit slower than expected, a little bit lighter than expected. And about a week ago, Jeff, I had what I thought was a funny tweet where I said, "Why draft Tez Johnson in round 3 when you can just get Jimmy Horn in round 4?" And the reality is, why draft either of those guys when you could just draft a running back?
Yeah, exactly. I One more guy, and this was so on brand for the entire weekend. And so Isaiah Bond insisted that
Oh
he was going
no.
to break the record for Xavier Worthy. And then he ran, like, I do think that he got down below, like, I think maybe it was like 4.39 was where he ended up, but way off that, like, I think it was 4.21 that Worthy came in at. That
Yeah,
is,
he ran a 4.41 was the time for Bond, and a very good time. But when you come out and say you're going to break the record and then run a 4.41, yeah, you got a foot in your mouth there.
there's been questions about so I made the joke on Twitter, and our friend Andrew Erickson at Fantasy Pros commented that somebody in the stands said the exact same thing. Was Isaiah Bond proclaiming that he was going to break the record and then not coming close is the most on brand thing possible for Isaiah Bond, because um, when you look at the package and the physical, I mean, that's good. That's a good time. And he's made plays before, but there's something that isn't adding all the pieces together, and
Yeah.
it's probably between the ears,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that I've heard about Isaiah Bond, and from people around, and so it kind of plays to that as well.
And we did talk last week a little bit about Matthew Bond or I'm sorry, Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond, and these guys being kind of similar players, but still preferring Matthew Golden quite a bit in drafts. And we didn't talk about him as an official, riser from the combine, but surely rose with his performance. I mean, I've seen a lot of people saying that he's basically a lock for a round one pick now. So
Yeah.
Matthew Golden had himself a really, really nice week. Now, for some of the fallers at the tight end position, Harold Fannin and Gunnar Helm. Gunnar Helm is an interesting case study because of the sprained ankle. But again, we don't want to talk about tight ends too much. We got a show on Wednesday coming out talking about all the tight ends. We'll talk about the guys that are trending up, the guys that are trending down. We'll talk about why we have Harold Fannin trending down a little bit and why we have Gunnar Helm trending down a little bit. That'll be out on Wednesday. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on notifications, press that little bell button so you can see all the new episodes we have coming out. Jeff, any bow you want to put on this conversation, on this show here, talking about risers, fallers, how much weight we want to put into the combine or anything like that?
Now, I can't believe we're here. It's one of these that we miss football dearly, but these little windows when football comes back into our life it's always fun, and it feels like to me like we're moving pretty relatively quickly through the offseason process now between the Senior Bowl and now we've hit the combine. We will have free agency coming up very, very soon, and before we know it, I mean, I'm lost in the black hole of tax season, but after that, then we do have the NFL draft coming out the other end. So, and that'll be here before we're ready for it. But
Yeah, trying to explain to friends and family and my wife and everybody why I'm still so busy. They're like, "Wasn't the Super Bowl like a month ago? Like, what do you mean you're busy?" I'm like, "This is one of the busiest times of the year. You don't know.
yes.
I've got a lot to learn." So we are staying busy over here at Football Guys, still putting out articles, shows, podcasts, rankings, rookie guides, all of that good stuff. So be sure to sign up at footballguys.com so you can stay up to date with all of the Football Guys content, shows, articles, everything coming your way. I'm Dave Kluge, joined with Jeff Bell. I want to thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on Wednesday to talk about our tight end rankings and tiers.